So thanks for joining us today. Just a little bit background, a little bit of background before we get started. And the three of us are really excited to be here and are very excited. It's a discussion group, and we are very much counting on you all to be in dialogue with us. It seems like we have a good sized group with a good number of people, but still where we could really have a nice discussion. So feel free to chime in with questions or comments at any time. Unmute, raise your hands, put stuff in the chat. We're really looking forward to seeing where the conversation leads. And I also just want to congratulate Stacey and Jihan and all the folks from the Grad Center on what has been an incredibly invigorating 2 days and exciting, but also just super, just super humane, like the way that things have been planned out, the lengthy breaks, so you really feel like you can dive into a session, detach for a little bit, and then come back. It's just been, it's all just been so smooth, so thank you. The idea for this session came from a discussion about public humanities that I was part of 4 or 5 years ago as part of the Connected Academics Pro Seminar, which was run by the MLA when I was a graduate student. And actually, Tara and Francisco are both alumni of that program as well. We were all in 3 different cohorts. And Stacey ran the program for the MLA before she joined the Graduate Center. And so the question was about public humanities, and there were lots of folks. We were all humanities graduate students from the New York area, finishing or having just finished our PhDs. And someone said, one of my fellow pro seminar folks said, there's a lot of people in here at rich private institutions. So I think for you all, public humanities means, like, you're silently saying that public humanities means something that goes beyond the walls of the university. But I teach at St. John's University in Queens, and so my student population looks a whole lot different than yours, and my university's mission is a whole lot different than yours, probably. And so what do we really mean when we say public humanities? And so the experts on working at a community college, teaching at a community college, doing that kind of community outreach are Tara and Francisco, not me. But as I said, I work at the MLA, and I think about graduate education and careers a whole lot. And so I come at this from the standpoint of thinking about community college careers as public humanities practice. I know that I'm at the Graduate Center right now and talking to lots of folks who are big believers in public institutions and public graduate and undergraduate education. But yeah, thinking about community college professorships as one of the many exciting careers available to graduate students finishing humanities PhDs, which of course are very numerous and diverse, and even when we talk about tenure track jobs, right? Because without ascribing any sort of hierarchy to them, as you'll hear from Tara and Francisco, a job at teaching at a community college looks a whole lot different and might be a better fit for someone than a job at a liberal arts college or at an R1. I think that's all I want to say for now. So maybe I'll let them say a couple words to introduce their perspectives, and then we'll turn it over to you all.
Sure. So thank you so much for the introduction, Brian. And we really wanted to keep things quite open for today because it is the last session. We wanted to just make space for people to talk as much as possible, but we thought we'd just introduce each of our backgrounds a little bit and some things that we're interested in talking about, some questions that we have, and see if that resonates with any of you. But if you have other questions or directions you'd like to take the conversation, we're also very open to that as well. So as I mentioned, I teach at LaGuardia Community College. I think I see one of my colleagues already in this room. Stephanie, welcome. So I'm in the English department. I got where I am by way of a PhD in comparative literature at Rutgers University, and to a large extent through the Connected Academics Pro Seminar, as Brian mentioned. For me, it was really something that, it was a process, but it was something that I'd been thinking about for a long time, working at a community college, because working at a teaching center and institution was really important to me, as was the social justice orientation of community colleges and the types of students that we work with and the mission and all of that. So some of the things that I would be interested in talking about and hearing from you all about are some of the ways in which career diversity programs can prepare people for both academic jobs and non-academic jobs at the same time, something that we heard from the keynote address yesterday, right? The way that some of these aspects of training can be helpful to faculty, whoever they are. And for me, I think of my role as sort of, I mean, it's academic, of course, but it's not as research heavy as if I was teaching at an R1 or even a liberal arts college. And so some of the skills that I learned through the various, so-called alt-ec or kind of career expansive programs that I did as a graduate student have prepared me excellently for my current job in ways that some of my colleagues who didn't do those because they were thinking of themselves as being, on a traditional academic track, they didn't have those opportunities. So what are, I'd love to hear from some people about what some of those skills are that kind of go both ways, so to speak. Also just, as Brian mentioned, right, thinking about how teaching in access-oriented institutions, community colleges, but other, access-oriented institutions, how we can figure the public humanities work that happens there as deserving of support and recognition to the same extent as other types of public humanities work, even though it is quite different, right? As Katina mentioned in the session this morning, it is sort of more oriented in an ecosystem of itself, right? Even though CUNY is a giant ecosystem, it's still sort of its own system, right? And so it becomes very internalized in some ways, which is helpful when you're trying to build, local connections, but also, how do you get recognition for that work outside of your city or your university system or whatever. And the last thing is maybe how focusing on humanities teaching as a public humanities practice can help in the transformation of what counts as scholarship within the academic sphere more broadly. And how can it also help us be better teachers, administrators, but also scholars if we can kind of connect it back to the research end. So those are just some things to throw out there for possible consideration.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. And it's Friday afternoon, so it's sometimes tough to make time for these types of things, but I really appreciate this. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Just to introduce myself again for those who came in late, my name is Francisco Delgado. I'm an assistant professor of English at Borough of Manhattan Community College. So that means, yes, I teach a lot of first-year composition courses, but I also get to teach some courses that relate more explicitly, obviously, to my own research interests in contemporary multi-ethnic American literature. So very similar to how Tara described her own journey. I got at this position, from a PhD from Stony Brook University. But in addition to just the PhD, I definitely think the Connected Academics program helped me. It helped me figure out where my values, were as a scholar, as a human being, and what type of work I wanted to do and what that work would look like. In addition to that, I was also, I benefited, I'll say, from receiving the Public Humanities Fellowship from the Humanities New York organization, which deliberately and like in a very focused way taught me how to communicate my research interests to non-specialized and sometimes uninterested audiences. So I got this training, or I was able to participate in these discussions that unfortunately, they weren't happening at the time at my own graduate institution. So I'm here today just because I love what I do. That's the easiest way to put it. My career at a community college, it aligns with my skill set of taking my academic interests and communicating them to those broader audiences. And it also taps into my belief that knowledge and knowledge production should have a public-facing or community-engaged component. So, the students at BMCC, as is the case with many two-year institutions, come from the nearby communities. And naturally, what they want to do with their coursework is connect it back to their communities as much as possible. So they want that publicly available or engaged component. And they want their work to be, I guess, out there in a way that traditional forms of knowledge production, like, the research essay if you're an undergraduate, or, the 5-chapter dissertation devoted exclusively to academic research if you're a graduate student, in ways that like those types of formats just aren't, publicly available. So what teaching as a public humanities practice means to me, I'll say at the beginning here, is just emphasizing that the work we do in the classroom, in fact, does reach outside of it and should. So it just, makes me want to go back to the question Ryan McBride posed in his lightning talk yesterday. You know, how do we expand our own and our students' imaginations, right? That was his question. And so what I do is I try to do that with my undergraduate students, you know, with the assignments that I offer them. So I'll mention 2 of those assignments now, hoping that, you know, and then maybe we can go into more in depth with them later if that's where the conversation goes. But one assignment I give my students to foster this interest that they already have in community engagement is I, you know, give them the option to create their own podcasts. It's a nice alternative to the research essay. And, you know, because it's going to be a feature on the BMCC library website soon, their work will be publicly available. And that was something that was very important to a lot of my students and why a lot of them chose that podcast option instead of the traditional research essay. Another assignment I'll mention just now real briefly is, you know, because I work at a community college, I was able to get to know and forge these relationships with cultural institutions that were nearby and, you know, prompt my students to do the same thing. So I have another assignment where students go to a nearby cultural institution, like they'll go to an exhibit at the National Museum of the American Indian, or they'll go to an event sponsored by the American Indian Community House. And what they'll do is they'll report on what they saw at that event and then connect it back to what it is we're doing in class. And so that's just a nice way for them to kind of forge these connections between what we do in class and what, you know, the work is and what work people are doing outside of class, how those 2 things connect. And then the podcast, of course, is just an opportunity for them to kind of elaborate on those connections and create those connections for themselves and for all of us. So that's all I'll say for now. I'm looking forward to talking more about, you know, any of these topics or any other topics that come up. Thank you.
Thank you both. So yeah, as we've all said, if there's something that that any of the 3 of us has said that you'd like to delve into further, if there's a question on your mind, if you'd like to share what brought you here to this session today, we're really open to whatever it is that you all want to discuss. So over to you.
Not sure if you want us to raise our hands or if you just want us to dive in.
I think diving in at this point is a-okay, and I think we're small enough that we'll be able to manage it. So please go ahead. Yeah.
So I work in public libraries, academic libraries. Pretty much if it's a library, I'm there. And so what I've been working a lot with is library makerspaces. And I recently had a student come in who just went through a 4-year program, and it was her bachelor's. And she said, I feel like I just paid $120,000 to figure out who I am. And then she went through 2 years of the actual workforce. And then she said, so I just paid $120,000. Now I know who I am, and now I know what I'm doing, and now I need to go back to school. So I'm kind of wondering how school can restructure to fit people's identities better, because people don't stay the same over time. And right now, the humanities are trying to become more relevant to, they're trying to prove their value and become more relevant. And I believe they are 100% relevant. I was an English major. And so to articulate this better, how can we align the humanities degrees with what people find meaningful and how this can turn into an actual career field? And how can we prevent people from feeling like they wasted their time in the degree that is indeed valuable?
Wow, that's like a huge question. I'm just going to say one thing that I love about teaching at a community college is actually that we have so many older students who come to us after they've been in the working world for a while and they actually know who they are already. They're in their late 20s, their early 30s. I had a woman in my class before the semester before the pandemic who had taken English 101 at LaGuardia. I don't remember how old she was at the time, then left us for 35 years to work in the military. She was stationed in all over the world and then came back to take English 102 at age 65. And it was just so amazing having someone like that in the class. But, you know, so I think it actually makes a big difference in terms of how to talk to students about the work that they're doing, because they have goals, like they have really specific goals, even if they don't have targeted career goals. But I do think that what you're saying is so important. And I think for me, one of the things about LaGuardia that's been really helpful is we have these 3 core competencies, the integrative learning, inquiry and problem solving, and global learning. And so, you know, it's definitely work in progress, and certainly not all faculty buy into this, but there's this sense that like all programs are working towards these bigger goals. And so whether you're, you know, in an accounting program or a philosophy program or whatever, that like there are broader goals of your education, because, you know, the reality is, and I try to talk to my students about this, that no matter what you study now, like nobody knows what you're going to be doing in 20 years, right? So like, it's not about like the specific thing, you know, that you learned. And I talk to them about, you know, what research shows about how little we remember after our classes are over, right? But it's about like these broader skills, these broader ways of thinking, this awareness, like the integrative learning competency that we do is all about how you make connections across the things you learn and to your outside life and to the experiences you've had. And that's like the learning process that's most valuable, right? Because that's what you have to do through your whole life afterwards, right? So for me, it's been about thinking about my classes, which like Francisco are mostly writing classes, you know, that first year comp that everyone hates to have to take, and trying to talk to students about how like, this is not just a box you tick off a bunch along with a bunch of other boxes to get your piece of paper to walk out the door, right? But it's really about like establishing a way of thinking for you that you will use, like, you know, wherever you go after this, you know. Oh, Stacy, yeah.
So this actually made me think, you know, I mean, I think I'm not lots of people have said this, but that like our education system needs to become more flexible so that people can come back and sort of like retool at various points throughout their career, right? So it shouldn't necessarily be this huge upfront investment, right, of $120,000 followed by, you know, $100,000 for a master's degree, which is an absurd amount of money. You know, but that it should be like really, and I think community colleges have a huge role to play in this. You know, thinking about how do we sort of like, you know, like it's not necessarily a matter of discovering who you are, right? Like it's like there's just some authentic self that's waiting to be like found. Rather, it's this like process that happens over and over. It's an iterative process, right? And so how do we think of the humanities as being part of that iterative process? Because a lot of the you know, curricula that are set up for people who are doing that sort of you know, sort of reshaping of their professional selves are very much rooted in like the business world, right? Are very much or the tech world, right? And then there are sort of these like soft skills, right, that get labeled you know, what gets labeled as soft skills, but I think in many ways are rooted in the humanities, right? And you know, people argue about the term soft skills. I personally like don't really have a problem with it because I don't think we should have a problem with softness because that's clearly a gendered issue. But like thinking about how do we sort of re-articulate some of what we are used to thinking of as soft skills as like capacities that are rooted in the humanities, and how we think about, you know, whether community colleges or other, you know, types of institutions as integrating humanities-based capacities into this sort of iterative educational process that we're, you know, that people are going to have to be be integrated into their lives as they, you know, as we move forward. I don't know if there was a question in there. I'm interested to hear what you know, any of you think about that.
I agree with it. No, I was going to say this kind of in relation to the first question we received from Amanda as well. Just, you know, one way that I get students to, well, not that I need to get them, like students realize the importance of these first year writing courses, even if they don't want to be part of them, because they understand the value of these quote unquote soft skills, or I like the flexible skills, right? That as Stacy put it. But to kind of get at this, you know, reiterative or iterative aspect of education, and understanding that students are not going to be the same in week 15 that they were in week 1. One thing I try to really curricularize in each of my classes, but especially in my 300 level classes where I have a little bit more freedom, is I build in a lot of, you know, reflective essay assignments that get grades, but nothing too, you know, I don't want to use the word rigorous, but for lack of a better word, rigorous. Where all I'm looking for is I'm asking students to, it essentially becomes a journal, right? Where students are looking back at what they wrote in, you know, week 3 versus week 1. And now it's like, you know, week 5, and they're like kind of tracking their growth in their understanding of what it is we're talking about and the skills we're developing, but also reflecting on like how these skills are going to benefit them personally. So you get beyond just the, oh, I want to take this writing class because writing, you know, well is important, period, right? They're actually now thinking more deliberately about, all right, well, in week 3, we discussed this and we worked on this skill, and that'll help me because I want to be a pharmacist and, you know, ... So I think those types of, you know, that more integrated approach of like just having students constantly reflect and articulate for themselves how these classes are important is just, you know, invaluable.
Sarah, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, full disclosure, I do not work at a teaching oriented institution. I'm at a R1 and I'm in a career center. So coming from a totally different angle, but also connected academics alum. So I share that with everyone on the panel. So one thing that I never taught first year composition. I was a Spanish student, not an English student, but I did work in our writing center. And so one of the nice experiences I've had is because I'm familiar with the language of our first year writing class, I'm able to refer back to that with students. And I really enjoy those moments as an opportunity to kind of reinforce that transferable learning that they've done. And so, you know, certainly one of the challenges I see at, you know, an institution like the one I'm at, where there's maybe, I saw this from a language perspective, but I imagine it's similar in an English department, is sort of, there's some faculty who, you know, teach the composition and some faculty who teach content. And there's kind of this kind of cultural separation. But at a community college, you're doing both, right? And so I was wondering if you could comment on maybe the possibilities that you see within a space in which, you know, a community of faculty members is already familiar with the language of that first year writing class, and kind of what students are learning from that, and maybe what other folks can take away from like the benefits of that collective knowledge that, you know, we could bring to our own institutions.
So I don't know if you have something. I mean, I wish I could say that there is a lot of shared knowledge between the people who teach composition and the people who teach the content in my institution. I feel like there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, but that there's still a significant gap. It's still something that we struggle with. You know, our department is huge because of the fact that we have so many first year composition classes. Like that's why we have so many full-time faculty. But it's still, there's still a lot of like assumptions about what those kind of classes are about, and what we do and what we think they're about and what other people think they're about there's a big difference. I just did a project last year. It got kind of interrupted by COVID, but a colleague and I went around and just did interviews with faculty who use writing in their courses across the disciplines, and just ask them, like, what do you see as, you know, the goal of using writing? Like, what do you expect students to do? And reading too, actually. And it was interesting because a lot of people like thought we were there to judge them or something in terms of how we were teaching writing and how they were teaching writing. And we were just like, no, we just literally want to know like what you do, because we don't have a clear enough sense of that. But I do think that, so I do think that there's like a lot of space still, I would say, for, you know, getting students, for example, out of the thinking that, as Francisco mentioned, right, like I'm here to learn how to write well, which for them often means just like to fix my grammar, right? And so how do you like, and we tried to think of writing as a process, and I try to teach them research as a process, and that, you know, all of these things, it's not just about a one and done, like an assignment, turn it in, it's done, like next, move on, like class, done, move on, right? And none of these things are connected, like that's how they think of it, right? And so we try to make those connections, but it's hard when, you know, for example, they'll go to another class and then another professor who, you know, in let's say a science class, who's well-meaningly introducing an essay, but then treats the writing aspect as an issue of citation and grammar only, right? So it's sort of, there's a lack of continuity there that's really a challenge. And, you know, so we, however we might try to break students out of these boxes, we also know that, that, you know, you have to really work institutionally to make that happen. So I don't know, maybe Francisco has better things to report than I do.
I don't know if they're better. I just wanted to add on to it, though. I agree with you that I think there is still this divide, right? Even within our own discipline of English, or, you know, English and writing studies. And I'm thinking back to my own graduate program where, you know, I would sometimes be talking to the faculty as a graduate student, and they would say, oh, well, I don't teach essay writing. I just teach, you know, Walter Benjamin, and, you know, they should already know how to write an essay. That's not my job to teach them. And it's like, yes, it is. You're an English professor. This is what? This is exactly your job. So I think that is maybe worth, and there's, you know, that also highlights the divide between like graduate education and community college education. Because like Tara was saying, I think there is a lot of, you know, there is some collaboration. At BMCC in particular, I can say with certainty that a lot, you know, a few of the lecturers we've hired as of late actually started out working at the Writing Center on campus, including the lecturer that was hired the year I was hired. So you know, we know the value of, you know, on-campus resources and programs like the Writing Center, the ESL lab we also have at BMCC, other programs of those nature. And you know, just to speak a little personally, I think it's good whenever you can expose students to what is actually on campus, because we could all put it on our syllabus, right? But students aren't actually going to take the time to just like, oh, you know, I have some time between my classes. Let me go check out where the Writing Center is and what that looks like, you know? So to actually bring them to these spaces and show them what they actually do, it's not just grammar, it's, you know, the higher order stuff that, you know, we're also working on in our own class. Really benefits students because it exposes them to all these great resources that are on campus, you know, which is never a bad thing, right? I'm thinking about my own experiences as a graduate student. And, you know, honestly, my most rewarding experiences happened outside of my department whenever I ventured off and did something for another program on campus and met people outside of my department. And that really helped me kind of create this, you know, sense of community that was, you know, maybe a little bit more interdisciplinary and just broader in scope than some of my other colleagues in my graduate program who kind of stuck to the department. So I think students, it's going to take time, but I think students, the more they're exposed to these types of resources, the more they appreciate them.
And just to pick up on the graduate education thread that Francisco mentioned, and to talk a little bit more about why we all thought it made sense to have a conversation about community college teaching at a conference about graduate education at work in the world. I think, and others think, and others have said before me, in terms of when PhD students are considering a variety of career options, the overemphasis on research, I think, is what gives people a lack of exposure to, and also a real skepticism of things like careers beyond the academy and careers at community colleges, right? Because we're taught, because if you're doing a PhD, it's at a research institution, and so your faculty are thinking, oh, I'm going to train this person for a kind of job like I have, whereas, you know, that might not be a possibility. That might not also be what that person wants. And so, Tara, I was thinking about what you said before about teaching your students that it's not about the stuff that they're learning, but the skills and the habits of mind and the processes that they're learning. In a lot of ways, that's sort of anathema to graduate education, right? Because we're taught in many ways to be these experts in this one tiny little field. And so, you know, decentering some of that kind of research. And Amanda, I think this gets back to your earlier question too. It's up to those of us who are in positions to be making change in graduate education to make space for people to bring new ways of knowledge production, new kinds of things that they want to study to the table, and not be dismissed because that's not rigorous, or that's not part of the canon, or that's not what we're trained to do. Did you want to chime in again, Amanda?
I guess it's sort of and you did actually just sort of touch on this a little bit. Kind of going back to basics, I'm a big fan of Wiggins and backward design. So what you do should follow in with your end goal. So I guess kind of a temperature test. What would you say is the purpose of higher education in your context? Another big question.
I mean, I guess, you know, there's another thing about community college teaching, right, is, I mean, the students are not often convinced even that they should be there, right? I mean, I have students who are thrilled to be there, right? They, as I said, they've worked elsewhere. They like want to be back in school. They know what they want to do. And then a lot of students who weren't even sure they wanted to go to college. So they figured, you know, it costs not so much to go to community college. So I'm just going to try this out and see how it goes, right? And so it's sort of, we have to explain to them, like, yeah, I mean, not explain to them, they have to figure out for themselves. We have to sort of show them what the value is, especially like in an English class, right? What is the value of spending your time reading these books and doing these activities and doing this writing that I'm asking you to do? You know, especially when, as we have now in the pandemic, like there are so many other demands on their time, on their energy. You know, they have families who need them to work. They have like so many incredible pressures in their lives. And so, you know, I think a lot about like, what's my justification for this poem this week? You know, that you have to read this poem and write a response on it. Like, what in the scheme of the world, why is this so important, right? But I think like, you know, so there's this tension, I guess, sometimes, which doesn't need to be a tension, but has to be reconciled for each student between like career goals and economic goals. And, you know, we have a president now who is a business person who is very concerned about our massive drop in enrollment and our massive budget crisis and all of these kind of economic pressures. And he, you know, rightfully wants to save the institution, and so is pushing a lot of career-oriented work. And then there's the humanities work. And I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive, but a lot of faculty see it that way. And it's hard to reconcile them sometimes, right? And so it's sort of, you know, I think it's a question of asking, like I said before, like helping students to see that their education is not about a bunch of criteria that they will fulfill to get a job, but that it's about, you know, a way of thinking, a way of being in the world, a way of reflecting on what you do, you know, a way of like being open to learning and knowing, I mean, right, it's like everything exists on Google, as everyone says, right? So it's not about like gaining content, right? Gaining knowledge. It's about like, how do you seek out your own knowledge and make judgments about what's appropriate knowledge for what circumstances and how to communicate that and all that, right? But yeah, I mean, it's a thing that I feel like we are forced to grapple with, like in very direct ways all the time.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you, Tara, for tackling that question first and giving me that extra time to mull it over. What a great question, Amanda. Wow. Yeah. So very much in line to with what Tara just said about, like, you know, our courses give students another way of thinking, another way of seeing the world, another way of engaging with it and with other people. Right. These are things that it sounds very much maybe like that, you know, finding yourself thing that we were talking about before. But there is some value to it as well, right? I just wanted to add as well that what, you know, what I do, at least what a lot of us do at the community college, simply put, is we don't gatekeep, right? That is where I think where we fit in the greater context of our profession. I'm not here to tell a student who doesn't already think they might belong here that, you know what, you're actually right, you don't belong here. You know, like, that's not my job. My job is to do everything I can. And, you know, realistically, I mean, for those who don't know, at community colleges, yes, I teach a lot more students per class than I would if I was at a 4-year. That's just my reality. But I'm determined, you know, and sometimes some weeks are tougher than others, but it's like, I'm not here to, like, you know, tell some students that, you know, yes, you should, you know, you get to move on, but you don't. You know, that's what I think my purpose is, and the purpose of community colleges in general should be. Just simply don't gatekeep, you know, let everyone know that they're welcome, let everyone know that they can do this. And that, you know, to go back to what we were talking about before, from Sarah's question, sometimes, you know, it connects to exposing them to those on-campus resources that a lot of students, because of family schedules or work schedules, just don't have the time to explore on their own.
Just before I turn it over to Nick, I just wanted to add, at the graduate level, one, as you put it, Tara, attention to navigate. To go back to Francisco's example, you know, not that it's every faculty member, but what do you say to someone who only wants to teach Walter Benjamin and doesn't see the value in teaching a first-year student how to write an essay, right? And you know, again, it's up to those of us who work in graduate education to start reforming tenure and promotion guidelines and not have everything be so research focused, which again just contributes to this devaluing of teaching, right? Which I think I thought was the point of higher education, but how much do we actually make space for that? And even just one last anecdote. I was in another meeting a couple of weeks ago and someone mentioned even the words we use. Like Sarah, I also come from a language department, and it was always, oh, I'm just teaching language. And then when you got to teach content, it's like you finally arrived. But the folks at the AHA, the historians, were saying they try not to use the phrase teaching load anymore, because why is teaching a burden, right? And can we talk about teaching responsibilities instead? But yeah, Nick, did you want to share something?
Yes, hi. Thank you all so much for the work that you're doing and for sharing it. You know, it's funny. I didn't think I'd ever find myself reflecting on this, but I'm thinking about theater department, undergraduate departments, as a really interesting model of the importance of bringing practice into the experience of students. And like, there's a, you know, I never really thought of it this way, but there is an imperative of the only way to learn is thought is through the experience of doing it. At least the only way to learn some things about it. And I think that I wonder if that's a model that's useful, because I've seen it pretty much everywhere except for at the PhD level, right? Where I went liberal arts school undergrad theater major. I've got my MFA. I taught at a state school in a BFA program, and then at some liberal arts places, and then like they all had budgets for this, right? And I know budgets are part of what is being taken away, but there also is the model of offering course credit for these kinds of experiences, which I've heard sort of popping up, of course, in a lot of different corners of this conference. And just to sort of tie it all up, I wanted to go back to something that Tara said towards the beginning, and maybe ask if you could expand a little bit about what you meant as how teaching humanities can be seen as research. And because in the theater also, we're finding that practice as research is a really important concept that's coming up, and it's creating alternative avenues for tenure. That is, your work in the world is considered the research rather than written publications. And I'm just curious, in other fields, you know, where does this idea really stand, and is it moving in that direction?
Yeah, so one thing I should probably say is, you know, Francisco and I both being at CUNY is, not all community colleges do this, but CUNY does require research from its faculty at the community college level for tenure. Not all community colleges do that, but we have that requirement. But it's of course much different than the requirement we would have if we were at an R1 institution. For me at LaGuardia, we have to publish 1, maybe 2 articles as a minimum for tenure. So most people do more than that. Some people have a book, you know, but the criteria are much more heavily focused on teaching and much more heavily focused on service. And for me, for promotion, the consideration is partially about research and engagement, and it's not just the articles, like we have to show like engagement in conferences and other forms of like activities over that time. But it's not all about the product is one thing that's different. But also that for promotion, a big consideration is your leadership. For early promotion to associate, it's leadership within your department at a minimum. And then for promotion of full professor, for us, it's mostly about leadership at the college level in terms of service roles. So that's one interesting thing, because it means that it opens up in the promotion kind of track a lot of space for people to do engaged projects on campus. And a lot of times that connects in some way to their research, just because like it's the most time efficient way of doing it. But there's a lot of support, at least at LaGuardia, for scholarship that's related to pedagogy. So some people only publish in journals about their teaching or other kinds of projects they've done on campus, collaborations, advising, whatever it is, e-portfolio, something like that. And then, you know, there's also like more traditional kind of either scholarship of teaching and learning research that's just about like the classroom, or, you know, those of us who come from the English department, you know, some people do, you know, rhetoric and composition projects that are also like more aligned with their teaching. But all of those are treated as equally, you know, sufficient for tenure as like disciplinary scholarship. So, and it's encouraged because, again, like since service is such a huge thing, they really encourage us to like, basically, if you've done a cool project on campus, write about it, publish it. Number one, it's easier to share with the rest of the college what you've done, because we have these various ways that we share that information. And so people know what's going on, but then also it's just like, you know, you don't have to be like living this whole separate research life that's not connected to all these other things that you're doing. So that's something that I really appreciate. And I think that for me, it's helped me to think much more closely about the projects that I do, because I'm trying to take the skills that I've learned from research in terms of thinking about a method, thinking about assessing and evaluating what I'm doing. How would I like learn from that and move on to something else, right? Like that process, when you apply that to not only your teaching, but any other initiative you're trying to develop, you know, it comes out better than if you were just randomly doing things. So yeah.
Yeah, you know, the great thing about teaching at a community college, and Tara said this as well, is that distinction between research and practice, or what we research and what we do, gets collapsed. So in the chat, I just shared a link to a journal, Teaching English in the Two-Year College, which is a pretty big deal journal. But they have features that are strictly about what we do. I think there are features called What We Teach or How We Teach. And it's just, you know, 3 to 4 page reports about an in-class activity that went really well. What about it worked? What about it would you improve upon going forward? You know, the type of stuff we talk about with colleagues when we run into them at the, you know, at the printer or wherever the, you know, wherever the case, back when we ran into each other at the printer. And it's, you know, this thing that is certainly substantial and certainly is rooted in the practice of humanities studies. And it counts toward tenure, right? To kind of tie back into what Tara was saying. So there is this, you know, emphasis or this value placed on pedagogy scholarship at a community college that was very appealing to me, and a reason why I wanted to get a job at a community college. You know, because there are these opportunities to publish in these really cool journals, to write explicitly about what it is you do in the classroom and nothing more. Like, you don't have to connect it to some grander, more philosophical thing. It's just all about, you know, I did this in the classroom for these reasons, and it was evaluated in these ways, and these are the results, and this is what I would do to improve it going forward. And, you know, at least for me, those are probably some of my favorite articles to read when I, you know, whenever I have time to, you know, peruse some journals.
And I will say, like, for me, I feel like that's something that I think graduate education could do a lot more than is currently happening to prepare people for. I mean, there's definitely a lot of great work going on in terms of like teaching people how to teach, which is really amazing. But I think like teaching people how to do research about their teaching is a slightly different thing. And, or not even that slightly. For me, I had to do like a 1.5-year seminar, which was offered at LaGuardia, to learn how to do scholarship around my teaching. And it was incredibly hard. Like, I would have thought like, oh, of course I can write an article about, about my teaching, but like the method was totally different. Like the levels of unpacking that I had to do about why I'm doing what I'm doing in the classroom that had just become so ingrained that I didn't even really reflect on it that carefully. Like all of that took so long to work through. And, you know, I mean, it was great that I did it early in my time there. I got that opportunity, but, you know, it to have started doing that process as a graduate student also might have helped me with my transition to teaching there a lot because, you know, it was sort of like happening at the same time. So, yes, as Sarah mentions in the chat, right, just the social science methods, like for me as a humanities person was totally, you know, unfamiliar. And, you know, I had colleagues, it was an interdisciplinary seminar. So I was one of the few humanities scholars in the room. And so they were like, why don't you know how to do this? I was like, it's different than what I do. And so it was really like, I mean, it was great, but it's just like a very different way of thinking in some ways. And just like the data collection and analysis, I had to learn how to do an IRB, like all of these things that other people knew how to do already that I didn't know until I got there. So, you know, these are things that, again, like, you know, whether or not you're a graduate student who's planning on going, you know, to a typical R1 job, like these are useful things that you may encounter no matter what kind of track you go on. So other kinds of questions, thoughts, other kinds of experiences that people have had that they just want to share, even if, oh yeah, Kristen.
So yeah, I was thinking the ways in which students are really not prepared for the kind of teaching that they will do if they have a sort of full-time teaching job, or even just being exposed to different kind of teaching. So, you know, there are students that come in that, let's say, have been teaching, you know, in high school or middle school or something, you know, like that. But, you know, a student that is, you know, graduating at this particular time from, you know, a PhD program, you know, who is really determined to teach will have to look right across a variety of types of positions, but they're really not being sort of nurtured to doing different kinds of teaching. And we do have, you know, some programs in which there's sort of, you know, opportunities to, let's say, teach or give a presentation in a you know, various, like whether it's a middle school or a assisted living home, you know, we have those, but it's not, they're sort of more short term or sort of individual opportunities. And then with that, I was also thinking about, you know, different types of writing, right? When they're sort of, you know, trained for, like, we're talking about, you know, hardcore theory or research methods, or sort of articulating in a certain way per discipline. It's not really opening them to communicate in different ways. And I'll see that. So, you know, if I help out, let's say, editing a cover letter or something like that, it's like, it's very difficult for them to sort of turn off and turn on a different type of writing. So I was just sort of thinking of the ways in which to better prepare or provide, you know, opportunities. And again, I feel like I can only sort of do like a short term or very individual opportunity for graduate students, right? To expand like the ways in which they teach the audiences that they teach for, and in their writing, the audiences that they speak for, right? Or are spoken to. So I just wanted to hear maybe some of your thoughts about that, about maybe the ways in which that could be integrated into a curriculum for graduate students, actually to even encourage a desire to do those things. I know that was probably a lot.
It's not, I mean, I was just seeing if Francisco wanted to jump in. I mean, one thing that I feel so grateful that I happened to be at the MLA once, and when I was on the job market, and I heard a presentation from the chair of my department now. She left that same year, and she said that one of the things they really want to see in a cover letter at a community college is specific examples of your teaching. And in particular, I think she said something about being able to assess your teaching or be able to show how you've adjusted your teaching to improve it, right? Like not just like a general teaching philosophy, but like specific examples of how you've learned from what you've done and made it better over time. And I've shared that with people over the years. And sometimes people have told me, you know, graduate students, well, I've never taught the same class twice. So I can't, like, I don't have an example of like doing something over and over and being able to refine it in that way, right? So that's a huge challenge, because like for me, I had taught sort of secretly without telling my DGS, like these classes like in between, you know, as a part-time lecturer at Rutgers so that I could get extra teaching practice. And so I had taught the same class like 3 or 4 times, and I learned so much through doing it over and over. Not everyone has that you know, opportunity, I guess. But I would say like, you know, just chances to like try different things, but then also try the same thing again, because it never, you know, I mean, no class that we've ever taught in like is ever gone perfectly the first time, right? So just being able to like, maybe even if it's just a workshop that you give for an hour, right, but do it like several times, and then, you know, give someone the ability to talk about, you know, how they adjusted it and how they were able to like, you know, reflect on the experience of the participants, and then, you know, move on from that, you know, because that's really what I feel like I have to do all the time in my classes, is like, I walk in, I see who's there, and then I have to adjust, because it's always going to be like a different group of people than what I expect, right? So that kind of thing can be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll just add that similar to Tara's advice, I got my advice was not as helpful when it came to writing a community college cover letter. I was literally just told, oh, take your research paragraph and your teaching paragraph and then just flip them. Done and done. Which maybe highlights the mentality of the person who gave that advice about what they thought about community college education and those types of jobs. But you know, where I was going with this question, and it's such a great question, Kristen, is like just the usefulness of, yes, reflection, but also like of templates, right? Thinking, and it maybe it helps me connect back to what it is I do at, you know, at BMCC. You know, the dark, dirty secret about writing instruction is students really dig templates, right? They like to know exactly what form they're writing, and why they're, you know, why this form is a thing, right? So, you know, that's why you get these diehards for the 5-paragraph essay, because, you know, yes, it might be a little formulaic, but it serves a purpose. It has served their purposes throughout high school. So it's, you know, something that they understand and something whose value they already recognize, right? So, you know, I think it'd be so valuable if graduate students could kind of get those same types of instruction or guidance when it came time to write these types of documents, right? Like, you know, what the hell is a diversity statement? I know what it is, but it's like everyone just kind of assumes you know how to write these job documents, you know, namely the cover letter, as you pointed out. And it's like there are these nuances that need to be accounted for, just as there are these nuances when you teach a student how to write an analysis essay versus, you know, a research essay, et cetera, right? So I think just being mindful of form and, you know, having like those templates would be so valuable, in addition to what Tara was saying about like having those opportunities just to reflect on what it is you do, right? And to refine it over and over again.
And I'll just add quickly that like being able to do it a few times makes you feel a lot more confident, which makes you more interested, right? Because you ended, Kristen, with like how to interest people in this kind of thing. I mean, it's so hard when you're just trying all new things all the time to feel like engaged by it. Right? Katie, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and say, now that I'm on the other side of things, teaching happens all over the place. And in my program in particular, we're teaching, I work with a ton of different instructors, and they're teaching humanities classes to adults, often seniors, but not always. And we're trying to sort of broaden our scope and scale there, but we love working with grad students. And it's a really great experience. You know, we have grad students who are teaching seminars for the public, for the Chicago community. We have graduate students who are teaching seminars related to their research to like high school and middle school teachers, my colleagues in teacher and student programs. We have grad students teaching other graduate students in different sort of research centers. And it's one of those things where I think there are a ton of opportunities for community partnerships in graduate education to provide graduate students with teaching opportunities for audiences outside of that sort of like traditional, you know, university context. And you know, I'm in the position where I have to like actively go recruit and like find graduate students and early career scholars and other folks to teach these classes. And so it's kind of interesting. You know, there's a real desire on the part of graduate students to get some of these experiences teaching the public, teaching outside of higher ed, or just teaching at all. And then there are all these different community contexts in which teaching happens. And so it seems to me that there would be really fabulous opportunities in a program to sort of start forging those connections to get graduate students those experiences, because it's very different teaching teaching the public. It's also very different when you're not grading and there are no attendance requirements, and you're teaching people who are older than you or younger than you, or who have different backgrounds and experiences that they're bringing to the classroom. So I just think, Kristen, to kind of get at your question, there are a lot of missed opportunities and misconnections there, I think, between graduate programs and their community contexts to provide those kinds of experiences and a resource for those communities, because they need teachers.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Jihan, for telling us we have 3 minutes left. If anybody wants to squeeze anything else in, we do have a little time. I did just want to say quickly to Kristen, I dropped a couple of links in the chat for some examples of programmatic and then sort of co-curricular teaching opportunities, which are more about teaching focused and access-oriented or community college programs and less beyond higher ed. We were talking about this, it makes me think of the conversation that we had earlier in a discussion group about when you say getting them interested in it, I think a lot happens at the level of recruitment and admissions, right? And so from the admissions letter, from the department's website, what if a person who's been a middle school teacher for 8 years says, oh, I want to do a PhD in English, but I think that's for people who want to be university professors. Like, what if we start to make space for them and then they come and do the program and tell us, like, here are the things, here are the connections between the two worlds. So I think even just starting to signal to people, not that there's not work for us to do on the program side, but just to signal, we value this, we have space for this, we welcome this, I think could be a big start. I hate having the last word, but I did organize this session, so I think, unfortunately, I might have to do that. I see Stacy unmuting, so she might be.
Yes, I might. If you hate having the last word, I will gladly take that from you. I will fall on that sword. So thank you all. This was a wonderful session. I just wanted to draw draw your attention to a couple of things in the chat. So we've got wonderful resources, which will be added to our resources document, which everyone is welcome to contribute to. And then we also have a post conference survey, which we really would love for folks to fill out. And if you want, we had wonderful swag for the original conference. And if you would like some of that swag, please let us know and we will happily send it to you. Although it has the wrong dates on it. It has the dates from last May. Let that be a lesson to all of us. Do not date your swag. But please let us know. We will be back in this room in 15 minutes for some closing remarks, very, very brief closing remarks, and then a social hour. So go grab a beverage of your choice and meet us back here. We'd be very happy to have the chance to sort of mingle informally in the digital space. And thank you so much to Brian and Tara and Francisco. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. For the social hour, we're very excited about this part. So Katina and I are just going to offer a few closing remarks to bring us to a close. Thank you so much for joining us over the last couple of days. So we are so appreciative of everyone for choosing to spend this time with us. We know that everyone is zoomed out, and we're really glad that you were able to do this. So special thanks to Jihan Takei and Justin Beauchamp, who actually planned this conference twice, once for in person and once for the virtual space. And thank you also to the Futures Initiative Fellows and the Public Lab Fellows who offered tech support and other support. And thank you to all of our presenters, our discussion leaders who were so incredibly flexible in working with us and who transitioned their presentations from what was intended to be an in-person conference into a fully virtual space. So thank you all. This could not have happened without each and every one of you. Yesterday in my wrap-up remarks, I noted the importance of the question of for whom are we doing this work, and how this question shapes the content, form, and function that our work takes. And asking for whom are we doing this work often results in work that doesn't look at all like the work that is expected by either the academic reward system or the bureaucratic structures that we're all in, and the work that we're all in. And so this disconnect between the work that many of us want to be doing, the work that speaks to the question of for whom are we doing this, and then the reward system and bureaucratic structures, the disconnect between these, it has become apparent over the last couple of days. I mean, it was apparent before then, but this kept coming up in our discussions. This disconnect results in points of friction, as well as in frustration. And these points of friction include tenure requirements and processes, which shape the work that faculty members are able to do in ways that are both obvious and less obvious. They also include the bureaucratic demands that many administrators experience. This ends up shrinking the time and energy that we have to put towards big picture thinking and structural changes, which is what many of us got into this work to do. And COVID and our new work from home and virtual environment has made some of these points of friction worse, even while they have alleviated others. And in all cases, I think they have made some of these points of friction more apparent than they were. Katina? Oh, you're muted.
Of course, because it had to start that way and end that way. Yeah, I mean, first I want to echo Stacey's thanks. This has been a really generative and thought-provoking 2 days for me, and I hope it has been for all of you as well. I want to think from here about some of the things that I've been hearing and then where we can go from here, where are some places we might be able to go from here. One thing that I have on my mind is the wide range in scope of possible changes and reform efforts. Some interventions are very small. One thing we talked about in a discussion group on admin burnout was using a scheduling tool to, slow down the massive thread of emails to try and get a meeting on the books. That's a very small thing. Maybe you can change one thing about a class that you teach. That's also small. Others are really large and structural. And I think that maintaining a balance between these small and immediate interventions and the ones that you're going to be pushing on for years before anything really changes might be an important thing to keep in mind. That way there's always a sense of some momentum, even when it can be hard to see the impact of some of the longer term things that you're working towards. I've been thinking a lot about resources. There are so many things that can be done on a shoestring, and I think that many of us do on a shoestring. And at the same time, not everything can be. It doesn't negate the need for money, for funding, for staffing of projects, for funding for students. And so how can we keep that big picture in mind and constantly be advocating for public reinvestment in higher education, and also greater transparency and accountability in budgeting decisions? I've been thinking about allies, and especially after the session I just attended with the CUNY peer leaders, thinking about community and the role of responsibility in community, and thinking about the people who have been here over these last 2 days as a small and sort of briefly formulated community. But I wonder how we can keep solidifying the network of support that has been really apparent over these last couple of days. We are from different institutions all over the country, some folks from around the world. And I think that we all share some really resonant goals, even if we don't have exactly the same institutional constraints. And so I wonder if there might be ways that we can not let that end here, but have it keep going. And I'm thinking about power. Who has power in what contexts? I think it's a fluid thing. I think there's a common sense that we, whoever we are, do not have power in whatever a circumstance might be. And sometimes that's probably true. And sometimes we may have more power than we think. And so being cognizant of where we sit within institutional power structures and when we may have more influence in our voice than we might expect to, I think is a really important thing, leaning on collectives when our individual voice doesn't have that power, unions and things like that. So finally, returning to what I said on the first day, I just really want to thank you all for helping to make this what for me has been a space of joy and possibility and generosity, and also critical engagement with the challenges and opportunities that we face. It is not easy to be both hopeful and realistic about where we are, and I really heard that consistently throughout the 2 days. And it's really been such a pleasure. So I'm hoping that the conversation will not stop here. We have a couple of concrete things that we can point to as far as, you know, continuations of these last 2 days of conversation. One is a collective resources document. Let's see, would someone mind putting that in the chat? I don't have the link ready at hand. Oh wait, yes I do. We've been putting together a collective resources document. Oh, it's already in there. Thank you very much. We've been putting together a collective resources document with things that people have mentioned over the last couple of days. There have been some incredible resources that have been shared. And I think a lot of times, you know, we go looking for a resource when we need it, and someone else has already done that work before of trying to find and gather and curate those. So the more we can point towards things that already exist, the better. So please feel free to edit and add to that document. We would like to ask you all to complete a survey, if you don't mind, about your experiences in the conference, and we can promise some swag eventually when we can get access to it at the Grad Center. It will have the wrong date on it, but we hope you'll forgive us for that. It's cute, so I hope you'll fill out the survey and we can send you some stuff. For GC grad students who might be here with us still, there's an opportunity for paid conference reflection blog posts that the Center for the Humanities is funding. So huge thanks to the Center for the Humanities for that opportunity. And if that applies to you and you're interested, the information is in the link. Hold on just a second. I'll drop that one in a minute. So more broadly, we've got the rest of this time won't be structured. I guess my bigger question from here is, how can we build alliances across our institutions? How can we continue having these discussions and just keep a sense of movement? You know, I think that for many of us, these are discussions that we've been having for a long time in various ways, and it's great to see you know, people coming back together in various contexts, whether it's from one conference to another or one project to another. That's really wonderful. Maybe there's something else that we want to do. Do we want to try to collaboratively write something, or you know, is there something concrete that we want to put our energy towards? We are speaking on behalf of Stacy and Jihan and Justin. We're really happy to hear from you all, both now and in the survey or by email, about ideas that you might have. I really love convening people, and so if there are ways that we can you know, continue these discussions, we are really happy to make that happen within the, you know, the frameworks that we have available to us. So that's really it. Just thank you all, and I hope that we can have a nice chat from here. Let's see, there's 25 people in here. I don't know, what's the best thing for us to do? Do we want to do just like a big group, or do we want to do breakout rooms? Or I don't know the best way to structure social things on Zoom.
Maybe if people have comments, we can give some like 5-10 minutes for that and then do breakout rooms.
Sure, sounds good. I'm going to unpin myself. If anyone wants to chime in, either in the chat or with your voice, please do.
Kathy, please go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Yes.
I've had only technological craziness the last couple of days. Yesterday I was had to miss part of this wonderful conference because a conference that had been rescheduled twice because of disasters around the world, including January 6th, had to be rescheduled at this time. And we didn't know why anyone was there. And it turned out the tool hadn't worked. So while I was giving my talk, people were frantically asking the person who was running the technology to enter the session, and our technology failed. So first of all, the technology gods really seemed to be with this conference, which is kind of amazing because there was a lot going on. And I know the technology gods are also technology humans. So huge thanks to everybody who made this run so smoothly, because I think on top of all of the alienation of being in little boxes, just making the technology work is really hard. So I'm not sure if people were aware that there were at least 2 people, I think, in just about every session helping to run things, figure out what might be going wrong and run them. So thank you to the invisible hand that made everything work so well here. I also learned so much from people at this conference, and I just feel grateful. Katina, or maybe it was Stacy, or maybe you both said it in different ways. We're talking about how hard it is to both be realistic and critical and hopeful at the same time, and how much energy it takes to be both. But I really felt that here, that people were really working hard to say, yes, the world is so not working perfectly right now, but that we're in a position to even gather together to talk about things that we can do to make it a little better, whether it's a scheduling tool or one inventory technique to use in a classroom next time so everyone feels included, or thinking about how to succeed in world domination for justice, anti-racism, peace, and equity. That's a really hopeful thing even to gather. So I felt really happy to be able to be part of this. Stacy and Katina, Jahan, and who am I leaving out? Jason, thank you for all the incredible work you put into planning, unplanning, and replanning a conference, which, and that people were so flexible is amazing, right? People actually had papers written and planned and all of that, and they were being, that's just amazing. That gives me hope in the midst of all the 10 million things that I'm critical about and have dedicated my career to griping about. So thank you to all of you for being here. For those of you who are at the undergraduate session with the peer leaders, wow, how can you not be hopeful when you see the next generation? So wise, so thoughtful, so real and honest. It was humbling to be able to be in the room with undergraduates thinking so deeply about all the things that are, say your question again, Stacy. It was a great question. For whom are we doing all of this?
Whom are we doing this for?
Are we doing all of it? Right? It's great. It's a perfect question to ask. So just huge thank you to everybody.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And yeah, I just want to mention along the lines of what Kathy said. I mean, there are so many grad students who have done such amazing work relative to this conference, whether it was FI fellows who were helping with technology, including when we had some unwanted intruders in our Zoom spaces. The papers that people were giving, including when they had hoped to present for an hour and we told them they could only have 5 minutes, and they still managed to pull together an absolutely beautiful and thought-provoking presentation. It really has been wonderful. The graduate students, the undergraduate students, it has been really remarkable to have such great people with us here these last couple of days. Erica, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to echo everyone else's thanks and enthusiasm for that balance that you've drawn between joy and being realistic. So I'm a PhD who's been out of the game for a few years, kind of was in one of those PhDs who had to kind of find their own alt-ac way. And the dialogue that you've opened up, I think really creates pathways for those of us who've kind of made our own way a little bit to feel like we can come back to the conversation in a way that is productive instead of draining. So thanks for doing that.
And well, thank you for joining us. That's it's really great to be able to have a space that people can come to from a wide range of different perspectives and experiences. So I'm really glad to hear that you felt like this was a good space for you too.